This is preparation for the 8th grade STAAR test. This is the mean absolute deviation. There's a fair chance you haven't heard of this. So let's talk about what it is. You can figure out what it is if you just pay attention to the title. The title is mean absolute deviation. Mean, in this case, just means the average, the arithmetic average. Add them up and divide. Absolute has to do with the absolute value of the deviation. Okay, deviation means how far off it is. How far does it deviate, or how different it is than what you were looking for. Absolute means we just don't want the negatives. We don't care if it's too high or too low. We want to take the absolute value, just how different is it from the number that we're comparing it to. So the average of the differences and no negatives. Mean absolute deviation. It's a measure of how spread out or how close our data is. Mean absolute deviation. An example. Acme dog food is required to have 37 grams of protein in a can. Since food can't always be identical, they test to be sure it's close to 37 grams. Why can't food be the same? Oh, because it's a natural product. Say if you have some beef in it, one cow from whom the beef comes from could have eaten better than another one, or just have a different genetic makeup, and the meat that comes from that animal would have a higher protein level or a lower protein level. You just can't have it be exact. So what we do, the way we work with it, is that we have it within a certain range. Since protein is expensive, too much means that Acme spends too much on the can and won't make a profit. Too little means the dogs don't get proper nourishment. We want our dogs to have proper nourishment. It really doesn't matter if it's a bit too high or a bit too low, it's just that it's close. For the dog, that would mean that one might have a little bit more, the next can he eats or she eats would have more, than less, than more, and it would all, as long as it was within a reasonable range, it would all be fine and the dog would be healthy. First off, we'll take the data. This is the random sampling that shows 8 cans with this value of protein. Add them up, divide by 8. When you do that, you're going to get 37 7/8, or 37.875. We take the deviation from the mean. What's the deviation from the mean? Well, in each one of them, it'll be a little bit different. Make sure you calculate it correctly. This is how much off it is. Notice there's no negatives. We just want to know how far off. We want a positive number. Then we average those and tell us what is the difference from the mean. So it's the mean that we're using, not the goal, but the mean that we're using. And in this case, it's 2 7/8, or 2.875. What action should Acme take based on this? Well, it just depends on how much they think is reasonable for their profit and for the dogs to eat well. There would be government regulations with regard to the content of food. Dog food in the United States must meet human food standards, so it would be standards that it would be healthy for a human. And so they would just have to see if it's within the standards or if it's likely to hurt the dog. This works in industry all the time. Another variation on this is actually better for the dog food. And there's a different type of calculation where you would calculate it based on what you need to have rather than on the mean of the values that you have. I guess I chose the dog food one on this one because there were problems with dog food a while back. Much of the dog food was made in China, and there were difficulties with some of the factories in China that were making them, and they actually chose to put liquid melamine in dog food because when that was in the dog food, it tricked the test that they would do to bring it into the United States. When they sampled, like we said here, they would sample it. When they sampled it, it said it had more protein in it than it actually did. So they could make their dog food for a lot less money, make more profit. But the problem was it caused organ failure in many dogs and killed dogs. So a lot of us, including me, cooked the dog's food, I cooked my dog's food for quite a while to make sure that she got good nutrition and didn't get this poison. Then later, they talked about how it had all been fixed, and I thought, okay, well, they learned their lesson, and so I went back to buying the dog food. And then they did it again, and so I haven't bought any Chinese dog food since then. It's straight Blue Mountain for my dogs, made in the US of A. So that's probably the reason why I chose the dog food. Again, there's a different type of calculation that you would do based on how close it is to what you want as opposed to how close it is to the average, which probably is a better one for the dog food. But this does tell us how spread out the data is. What it tells us is the data is 2 7/8 bigger, or different from that. It gives us one number that we can use as a notion of how spread out it is, and relative to what we're doing, that'll tell us whether it's appropriate to have something that's spread out. And then there's the other thing, mean absolute deviation. When I first saw it, because I'm like not young, when I see MAD, when I first started doing these, I saw mutually assured destruction, which was a policy of the United States government and the Soviet government in the 1980s in which we all had lots of nuclear weapons so that we could kind of destroy everyone. So what we did is we said, well, we've got a lot of weapons and you've got a lot of weapons, so we won't shoot them at each other. It was a policy of our government and theirs, and it worked, which I'm glad. Mutually assured destruction is also in history will be the term for MAD. In math, however, it's mean absolute deviation. And mean absolute deviation tells us how far spread data is. It's one of those data analysis tools that we use to get an idea of what our data means. So again, mean absolute deviation tells us how spread out the data is. And here endeth this lesson.